you could have the best stablecoin infrastructure in the world, the cheapest and the fastest, but if no one else is using it, then it effectively becomes worthless. As in, why would I want to be sitting on, say, $1 million worth of your stablecoin if no one will buy it off me? There's no liquidity in the market.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 51st of the Colors of Web3 and Entrepreneurship. My name is Lum, your Web3 host. For those of you who are new to the show, Colors of Web3 and Entrepreneurship is a show highlighting the journeys of builders and innovators in Web3 and entrepreneurship. Some topics, especially in Web3, may get technical, but we do our best to keep it accessible for most of you. Here today, I'm joined by William Phelps. He's the founder and CEO of UmrahCash. William, can you give a quick introduction by yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Lam, firstly, for the feature. It's great to be here. As mentioned, my name is William. I'm originally British from London, and I'm the CEO of UmrahCash, a fundamentally fintech platform based between Saudi Arabia and West Africa, simplifying access to local currency in Saudi for Islamic pilgrims from emerging markets. Prior to starting UmrahCash, I was with a Web3 fund based in Nigeria for about 2.5 years. Investing in 53 emerging Web3 projects from 11 different African countries. And it was about 6 months ago that I identified the gap in the market associated with pilgrimage and particularly access to finance in Saudi Arabia, and founded UmrahCash as a result.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, so I think probably many of you will be curious to know about your professional or maybe your education background. Feel free to pick a point maybe from your college day or maybe even before that, and then share with us leading up to the current position. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I must admit I did quite a high level introduction, but I'll get into more detail. So I mean, my sort of path into, I suppose, Web3 and sort of tech, I guess, even though I'm not a technical guy, has been somewhat meandering. I graduated from Cambridge in 2020 with a degree actually in philosophy. So not particularly tech adjacent. And after working in traditional finance in London for a year, I realized that my real interest was in emerging markets, specifically developing economies. Africa was, I suppose, a real area of opportunity as far as I saw it. And blockchain and Web3, primarily from a speculative perspective, had always been something that I was interested in, not only on the basis of potential returns, but also on the actual fundamentals of the technology. And I guess in that respect, it's maybe less speculative and more about application. So considering opportunities in Africa, which is not only a very dynamic market, but also one which, in my opinion, shows, I think, the greatest use case of blockchain, it seemed a natural fit. And I was very fortunate to encounter and engage with Adiverse, which is a Cardano Web3 fund based out of Asia, but active across the African continent. And I joined them in May of 2022. And that was a great opportunity because not only did it really get me deeper into Web3, particularly from the perspective of practical use cases, but it also allowed me to better understand emerging markets in general and Africa specifically. So it was within the, I suppose, an African context, living in Nigeria, Lagos at the time, that I really began, I think, to appreciate the real world use cases of fintech. If we look at Nigeria, for example, this is probably the best example, but by no means an isolated case. We see there are serious issues surrounding access to digital finance, access to foreign exchange, access to cross-border finance and payments. Ultimately, it's an access issue, and this is the case across the continent. And what I began to see when I started Adiverse and spent a lot of time on the continent in Africa is actually the solutions that blockchain brought to the table. Even if it wasn't specifically a Web3 solution, it was operating on the back end. It was stablecoins, it was quick settlement, it was liquidity provision. And I began to realize that actually this is a very special technology, not from a meme coin or altcoin perspective, but instead the way it can actually be layered quite effectively into conventional, I suppose, methods of transacting and even retail solutions. And so we were investing for around about 2.5 years before the fund and by extension myself shifted, I suppose, our view to Saudi Arabia. And it was at that point really that I began to see the overlaps between many parts of Africa and the Middle East. On the one hand, in virtue of religion and pilgrimage and religious travel, Saudi Arabia, of course, being the center of the Islamic world through their custody of the two holy mosques in Mecca and Medina. but also through, I suppose, more secular points of overlap, such as trade. And the UAE is a great example of this, movement of people back and forth. And so then the question quickly became, taking into account the opportunities in the Middle East and the connections it has with the rest of the world, how can we leverage these real-world use cases we've seen in Africa and the technology of blockchain as a whole? And so really it was out of that UmrahCash was born. It was taking into account the issues I mentioned, the access to finance, with the connectivity and the potential that Saudi Arabia in particular offered. Because I suppose just as a final point I'd mention, one of the particularly interesting things in my view about Saudi Arabia is that it stands almost as a complete polar opposite to what we observe in Africa. In Africa, we look at entrepreneurs, particularly those in the Web3 space, and they are very much building from the ground up. African startups are fantastic because they're incredibly lean and resilient. There's no support, there's very little investment. So if you're going to start a company, it has to be a successful business model. In Saudi, everything is top down. The government have created a fantastic investment and entrepreneurship ecosystem. They actively sponsor entrepreneurs. There's a lot of money, resources, and training available. But really what they lack at the moment, I think, is the culture of entrepreneurship, which they're doing actually a lot to foster as part of the government's Vision 2030 agenda. And so as a result, there is actually this interesting ability to link the two, taking full advantage of all of the opportunities that Saudi has to offer in a way which is not only beneficial to Saudi, but also those markets that are connected to it. And it was out of that UmrahCash was ultimately born. We've got 2 offices in Saudi Arabia, 1 in Nigeria, and very simply, we effectively enable pilgrims easy access to Saudi Riyals via our agents and our, I suppose, transaction channels, both into and out of the kingdom. I'll give you more detail as to how it works later, but I'll stop talking for now.
Sure. Oh, cool. Yeah, interesting. Sounds like you have a very interesting background with it. What made you study philosophy? I guess that's my first question.
Yeah, I asked myself the same thing. I think, really, for transparency, it was more philosophy, religion than it was sort of pure continental philosophy. And I think it largely is because for me, I would say I have tendencies towards generalism, but I wouldn't say I'm a generalist. And so, at least at Cambridge, the great thing about philosophy and indeed theology is that it provides a greater point of overlap between history, literature, language, and sort of pure philosophy. And so the ability to combine all of them under the auspice of religion, which I approach from a secular perspective, but as, I guess, a unifying principle throughout all of these different disciplines was a really great opportunity. And I think the final thing I'd add as well is that it was a great academic exercise insofar as it's a very rigorous degree and one that sort of created some good, I would say, cognitive habits that have stayed with me since.
I see. Cool. Was there a lot of writing or using logic involved?
Too much. I've sort of rebelled against writing ever since. I think it's a shame actually because I used to be very I used to have great sort of discipline when it came to writing and the ability to write. And I remember I sat my final exams during COVID, so everything was remote and at home.
Yeah.
And it was a 2-week period of sort of thousands of words of final exams. And since then I've really never written anything quite as substantive, which I think is almost like a PTSD style rejection of writing. So I need to get back into it. But in short, yes, it was a lot.
Interesting. Yeah. So I think I only took like one philosophy class or maybe like a logic class back in college. It was like a long time ago though, but I don't remember much. It was like something about using logic and predicate and there's all these terms. I only took it like more than 10 years ago, so I don't ask you any details about it.
But the thing is that the sort of the area of logic is fascinating. Admittedly, it's something I stayed away from because I'm not a mathematician, but the overlap with pure mathematics is really interesting insofar as, how does A get to B? And the logic by which systems operate and I guess sort of processes flow. On the surface seems very simple, but actually there's a lot you can do when you extrapolate it. And so not at Cambridge admittedly, but elsewhere I knew a lot of people who would do, for example, philosophy and maths as a dual major, I guess, and they click together really effectively. Huge respect to people who do that. I was far more word-based, let's say, than logical maths, but super interesting.
I see. Cool. And then you said you went on to work in TradFi. Did you work at a bank or a fund?
Yeah, so I was working. It was an interdealer equity derivatives broker. So effectively, it was buying and selling option structures between big banks, which was extremely interesting insofar as it's a great, albeit I think somewhat niche introduction to the world of traditional finance. So what we would do ultimately is we would broke options structures between typically tier one banks and funds. But it's one of those careers which I think you either do for 30 years or you don't do at all, because it's all about client relationships. And it's also an extent of either being very good at it or not being good at it at all, because it's when it comes to broking, it's not so much about financial knowledge or understanding or finesse, but more about how you actually manage relationships between parties and counterparties. That is to say, how you manage the buyer and the seller. And so it was very interesting insofar as you have, I had colleagues who would work the same maybe 4 or 5 structures every day, had done for 20 years, and that was their niche. And as mentioned, it taught me a lot about the world of traditional finance and some of the niceties of derivatives in particular. But ultimately, I think, as I mentioned in my introduction, it was more emerging markets and I guess maybe the more flexible aspects of emerging finance that interested me rather than traditional sort of corporate operations.
I see. Cool. So would you say that was more like an account management role, or was more like an analyst, or?
No, it was broking out and out. So it was very much that you would have clients, a range of clients at various banks. One would be looking to, for example, sell an ENI call option, and your job was to find a buyer amongst your other clients, and then you would work the price between them to a point which was acceptable to both, and effectively the volume of the actual trade determined the amount that you would personally make off it. So it was broking. It was very, and the other thing I liked about it as well is that the atmosphere was, I would say, incomparable to that which you would find at a bank or a sort of corporate institution. It was very rough and ready. That's the nature of broking, particularly in London. But at the same time, I think it was a very dynamic atmosphere. Although you are working the same structure with the same clients, there was a feeling that with each day is a new possibility. Because once the market's shut, there's nothing left for you to do. So, as I say, a good introduction, but not for me long term.
Interesting. Yeah. Cool. And like, what actually made you learn, or how did you discover Web3? Did you discover when you were in college, or doing your work, or when? What was the first thing that you learned about crypto or Web3?
Yeah, so I must admit, I'd actually, whilst I was at university, I sort of steered clear of it on the basis that it's an interesting story. So the second half of my time at university was very much parallel, or it coincided with the final days of the Brexit negotiations in the UK. So the UK had obviously voted to leave the European Union in 2016, and that deal was really finalised in 2019, running into 2020. And this really was my first exposure to blockchain, because there was continued talk about how borders would be structured as the UK left the EU, specifically with Ireland. Because obviously Ulster, Northern Ireland, shares a border with the Republic of Ireland. Yeah. And how you manage that was extremely difficult. People kept going on about blockchain-based solutions, how we can process people, cargo, goods, etc., moving from north to south, and vice versa. And so on that basis, blockchain for me for a number of years was always connected with logistics, which is an area I've had very little interest in and admittedly still do. And so I always slightly rejected this until, of course, COVID comes around, the Americans get their stimulus checks, and suddenly crypto is the hottest thing. Admittedly, as it had been in certain communities for years past, but it's now really in the public eye. And it was with a couple of friends actually from university who I think spent most of their period of COVID basically NFT sniping, that I began to learn more about the business, more about the industry, more about the commercials that sit behind it, and then ultimately the technology which powers it. And it was around that time that I maybe entered with the altcoin rush, but then again, as mentioned, actually looked into the tech, and having discovered stablecoins, realized that there's a lot of interesting use cases.
Cool. Yeah, interesting. So you didn't discover it, and then so how did you move from the TradFi world to the? Did you say you moved from Adiverse, right? Which is like a venture capital firm, I suppose.
Exactly.
Investing in other related crypto business?
Yeah, so it's effectively, I mean, the big mandate with Adiverse, it was twofold really. On the one hand, it was commercial insofar as it was a fund actually from an organization called Emergo, which is one of the venture wings of Cardano. So it was a commercial fund on the one hand, but the second and almost equal mandate was to promote the use of Cardano in Africa. So one of the, I guess, terms by which we invested in companies was that, or the agreements was that they would issue tokens on Cardano or integrate Cardano into their tech stack. So it was a dual purpose, really. And yeah, to be honest with you, Adiverse was very much a marriage of convenience for me in my career, insofar as my ultimate aim was to go and work in or with respect to an emerging market, Africa in particular. And as mentioned, I sort of had this latent interest that was becoming more and more acute in Web3, blockchain, stablecoins in particular. And so when I encountered Adiverse, actually through sort of a LinkedIn introduction, it combined all of these factors for me. And much like, I suppose, when I studied philosophy, it was the overlapping of disparate threads into a general but specific mandate that for me was extremely interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, cool. Actually, I don't know that they also do expansion in like Africa. I mean, one thing I know about Web3 is like it's kind of like global by nature, but I guess there must be some reason why they focus on. But I guess is there some business that require like physical things, or maybe things that are also like maybe regional specific? Is that why like Africa?
Yeah, so I think the African focus is I mean, we could talk a lot about it, how it's a dynamic market, big market, consumer focused, low spending power, but high population. So there's obviously a lot of commercial reasons, but I think one of the USPs of Adiverse, which is one thing that I really liked about it and really worked hard to perpetuate, is the presence on the ground. Because there are a lot of Africa or emerging market investors who work out of, for example, London, New York, Singapore, with very limited, I think, boots on the ground. But one of the most essential and important parts of investing in Africa is understanding the local context. And that's not just about the continent as a whole, but it's also what, for example, makes Nigeria different from Kenya, West Africa different from East Africa. Even within West Africa, what are the differences between markets? Whether it's how people think, how consumers act, or alternatively the dominant technologies. So, for example, we typically think of Africa as undigitized and unbanked, but in many parts of the continent there are actually quite sophisticated, albeit technologically rudimentary, digitized banking and money platforms. Mobile money, for example, in East Africa being one, and instant transfers being another in parts of West Africa. And I think that without actually understanding that context and sort of seeing how these technologies are used and how they can be used, it's very difficult to make informed investment decisions. Insofar as someone could have the greatest solution to, for example, mobile money on-ramping to stablecoins, but if you don't understand how mobile money works, the importance of mobile money, and then subsequently the, I guess, utility of stablecoins in that market, it means nothing to you. So that, I think, really was the reason that we were very much hands-on, boots on the ground with respect to the African continent.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah, I know that M-Pesa, right? M-Pesa in Kenya.
M-Pesa, exactly.
That's
in
one.
Kenya.
Yeah, and then there's
that really is the case study. Because the fascinating thing with M-Pesa, and it has actually a lot of, I could speak about this at length, but blockchain and Web3 has a lot to learn from M-Pesa, because M-Pesa is used by over 95% of Kenya, the population. Whether it's a guy selling corn on the street, or you go to a high-end department store, everyone uses M-Pesa, including the government. Yeah. And M-Pesa was first rolled out, I think, in 2007. And since then has completely captured the market. But the way it's done so has not been through educational campaigns, really, or forced adoption. It's simply been that because so many people use it, it's impossible to survive without it. And at the same time, it's extremely intuitive. Whether you have a feature phone or the latest iPhone, it's exactly the same. And so I always tell people when they're considering, how do we push blockchain adoption? How do we roll out Web3 to emerging or developed markets? Don't rely on, we can educate people, or we can teach people how to manage a wallet. That's the wrong way of going about it. You look at M-Pesa, and that was totally intuitive. It's just that it was so adopted within 2 or 3 years of its release that it was impossible to ignore it. And that, I think, is actually a great lesson to founders, which is when you're looking at integrating blockchain, you should do so in a way which is intuitive to the user. It's like, for example, a light switch, right? No one ever taught me. I don't know really how light switches work. I mean, I do, but I couldn't give you a blow-by-blow explanation of how light switches work. But I use light switches every day. Same with computers, same with phones. And I think that Web3 should be the same. It's like M-Pesa. I can guarantee that the majority of people who use it don't really understand the back end, but they use it and it works. So, I mean, that's just a bit of a tangent, but a point that I like to make.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's a fair point. Yeah, and I do hope that in the future, technology in Web3 will be simpler and simpler to use, and one day maybe it should become invisible, right? People use it without knowing it.
Exactly.
About one more thing I'd like to ask is that actually, like, what Adiverse, Cardano, right? The whole ecosystem. Was there also anything particular in the ecosystem that make it suitable? Like, is there something that unifying all the investment together that they chose in Africa?
Yeah, so I guess Cardano is a very interesting, I guess, both concept and organization. Insofar as I would say that out of almost all of the chains, primarily through their subsidiary called Emergo, which is the venture wing, they're extremely present in many more niche markets, which other layer 2, layer 1s, any layer, any blockchain are not present from in an institutional capacity. So as said before, very much boots on the ground is the emphasis. And then from a tech standpoint, one thing that always draws me to Cardano is the academic aspects, which I know is somewhat contradictory to what I've just said, but it seems that within Cardano there's far more room to develop and conceptualize and I suppose create a more idealized system within Web3, whether it comes to privacy, authentication, verification, transacting. When Charles Hoskinson, I think, first wrote that white paper, it was very much filled with that sort of idealism, which to me is extremely interesting. But that leads on to, I suppose, almost a downside with Cardano, which is that compared to many chains, so we look at even layer 2s, we look at Celo, we look at Solana, we look at Near, for example. Each of them are, in my view, more adaptable and better suited to, say, an emerging market or an African context, because the emphasis is not actually on those philosophical academic elements, but instead more on high transaction speed, low gas fees, easy interoperability, etc., etc. And so that was actually one thing that with Cardano we saw as a consistent and repeated issue, which is Cardano is great and it makes a lot of sense on paper, but the ability to actually implement and work with it was somewhat limited compared with other, I think, more rudimentary chains. But something which I think is always being worked on, and again, with respect to the conceptual aspects of Cardano, it is a continually developing chain.
I see. Cool. Yeah. Thank you for sharing your opinion about that. Yeah, I want to leave a link maybe up here to episode 33 as well, where I talked to the CEO of NewM. He's basically running a decentralized music distribution platform on Cardano as well. So just leveling out here for you who might be interested. Cool. So before we deep dive into your company, maybe just one fun question. Can you share with us what you do for fun in your free time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a big thing for me is travel. I try and mix it with the day job as much as possible. I mean, I move between the various sort of centers that we operate, but I try and make it as much of a tourist experience as I possibly can. I think it keeps things fresh. And related to that as well, I'm big into languages. I have a very bad habit of trying to pick up a new language, getting bored with it, and moving on to the next one quite quickly. But as a result, I can normally have about 10 seconds of dialogue in quite a few languages. Again, all big niche. And I think final thing as well is I'm big into squash. But recently, actually, I've discovered paddle in the Middle East. I don't know if you have that in Japan.
No, I don't think so. Probably
no, it's like paddle's very interesting. It's sort of halfway between. In the US, it's something called pickleball, which I've never played.
Oh, I think I've seen it. So I've never played that.
It's like real tennis, where real tennis being where you can play the ball off the walls and ceiling of the court, and squash to a certain extent. So I think it's a European Middle Eastern thing, but keeps me busy.
Interesting. Cool. So you said you like languages a lot. I also like languages a lot too. I tried. I mean, I do want to learn 2 more languages in the future, but right now I just don't have the time. How many languages do you say you'll be like conversationally, maybe at the conversational level, capable of speaking?
Yeah, so I would say it's well, obviously conversational. If I'm being very honest, probably 3.5 at the moment, and then the ability to have a conversation would be 4 or 5. Because I think the interesting thing with languages is it's very much an insight into how people think and how people conceptualize and view the world. So obviously there's a great novelty attached to being able to chat with someone in a cafe, but ultimately I think reveals a lot about a people as a whole.
Yeah.
I mean, what languages can you speak?
Yeah, for me, well, Vietnamese is my mother tongue. English is the second language, but actually it's like almost my first language these days, actually, because I use English every day, pretty much. And then Spanish as well. I learned when I was in the US, and then I live in Japan, so I speak Japanese as well too. Yeah.
Great. How have you found learning Japanese?
Oh, how did I learn? Or how long?
Well, I said, how have you found learning it? Because that's always struck me as a difficult.
Yeah. So I mean, if you live in Japan, you have like a chance to do the immersion, right? Working, living, hanging out. So when I first came here, I didn't speak much, but after living for a few years, right, just immersing in the society, hanging out with people, working, especially if you're participating in meetings in Japanese, of course, your business Japanese will get better. Hang out with friends outside and maybe go to izakaya drinking and maybe sometimes play sports, right? And then you learn like casual and daily conversation with Japanese. I think after a few years, I think I was pretty good at Japanese. So
fantastic.
Yeah. What about you? What are the languages you can?
So yeah, I mean, it's a combination of I think sort of things I've picked up and those I learned in school. So the classic obviously is French, which actually, I studied French in school for 8 years,
nice.
and then abandoned it completely as soon as I was able to. Until again, when traveling in Africa, particularly in the DRC, I was forced to use it again.
Right? Must be helpful, right?
Oh, well, exactly. Yeah. Because and actually, the great thing with speaking French in Africa is the issue with speaking French in France is that they're very snobby about the French you speak. To the point whereby they're very proud of the French language, and so one mistake and they will laugh at you. But in particularly Central and West Africa, it's a lot more liberal. So it was a very nice soft landing to be able to use the French again. And actually, sort of through those travels and my time spent there, it's got back up to a reasonable standard. Aside from that, I mean, Russian is the other language I'm pretty proficient in. I spent 3 months studying in Kyrgyzstan in a university holiday, which is actually great because it was a very traditional language school insofar as we had, it was one-on-one classes. We had 4 hours of tuition a day. And it was effectively just, at least initially, being sort of shouted at or barked at in Russian. And much like a baby, you eventually just pick it up via intuition. And the great thing is because I think there's a big problem associated with learning languages from textbooks. It's more of a memory exercise than it is an actual sort of expression of thought. And as you said, I think doing it via immersion really makes things not only quicker and easier, but also you learn to use grammar, for example, because it sounds right rather than because it's the third row in the grammar table that you learned that morning. So that was a fantastic experience. My only problem is I don't really have much of an opportunity to practice it, at least in the areas that I work. But those sort of the main 3. And then I've also dabbled in a couple of Central Asian languages. But again, I think because of lack of immersion, I was never quite able to get as far as I would have wanted.
I see. Cool. But I think that's quite impressive, though. I mean, being trilingual. I think very few people in the world like trilingual. I don't know the exact number, but I'm guessing that maybe 2%, maybe probably even less. I would say,
Yeah, well, I think I do think again with immersion, languages are ultimately accessible to anyone because if you look at every movement of people from one country to another in the history of as long as people have been moving, so I guess in the history of the world, there has always been that linguistic exchange. And I'll go out on a limb and say that not everyone, I mean, me included, I'm not a particularly great linguist. I don't think most people are skilled linguists, but people have always been able to pick up languages and be able to communicate. I think what it really comes down to is the methodology and the modality of doing that. So I think as long as anyone really has access to that immersion, then language is very possible.
Agree. Yeah, absolutely. I also think that, I mean, for me, learning language is more or less about communication, right? So you learn a new language to communicate, talk, make new friends, travel to a new country, experience new things, learn about the culture as well. So yeah, that's cool.
Exactly.
Cool. Thanks for sharing about that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and deep dive into your current company, UmrahCash. Feel free to share any presentation or website if you have.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, maybe what I can do actually is I can share my screen and just do a very quick run through of how the company works. I won't bore you with the full presentation, but I'm just going to skip through at a very high level, and you'll be able to get a sense, I hope, of really what we're building, and I think more importantly, the context in which we're building. And the reason I say the context is because it is a big market, although in some respects relatively niche one. You should be able to see my screen.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go full screen here. Oh, actually, I've frozen. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so as mentioned earlier, what we're building at UmrahCash is a fintech solution that enables easy access to Saudi pilgrims from emerging markets. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but I'll explain why it's important. So in Saudi, as I've mentioned, we see rapid growth in just about every sector. So the kingdom is powered and moved by the Vision 2030 agenda. The idea being that Saudi will have developed rapidly in every sector and vertical by 2030. 2030 is going to be Saudi's year. And we see this particularly with respect to globalization, insofar as now more than ever, there's a huge influx of travelers, of expat workers, of knowledge sharing both in and out of the kingdom.
Interesting. Wow, there's like 14 million migrant workers in there. What's the population of Saudi Arabia?
35 million.
35, okay.
So a significant portion actually of that 35 are foreign migrant expat workers. It's very similar to Dubai, if you've ever been.
I see. Yeah, I've been to Dubai.
Yeah, and on top of that, there is a significant number, and it's going up every year, of religious visitors, of pilgrims. And that's always been the case, and people forget this because despite historically being maybe more closed than other countries, Saudi is one of the most globalized. It's been the focal point for Muslims around the world. And the majority of both these pilgrims and these migrant workers are from emerging markets. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and then West and parts of East Africa also. But despite all of that, there are no international fintech solutions that serve them, because Saudi is really getting up to speed with that Vision 2030 and that globalization push. But there are some areas which are still in development, one of which is fintech and fintech regulations. Because the issue at the moment, and this is the problem and really why we started building, is that unless you have Saudi residency, which is very difficult to get, or a Saudi passport, which is by birth only in certain cases, you cannot access any kind of local fintech product. So that means digital banking, it means mobile wallets, it means even prepaid debit cards. They're inaccessible to you if you come as a pilgrim or a short-term seasonal migrant worker. So the gap obviously is effectively in this overlap between pilgrims visitors from emerging markets already struck with capital control, currency issues, etc., and the inability to actually access any kind of fintech product, which might otherwise ameliorate the situation. Because if you go to Pakistan, you go to Nigeria, there are a lot of products which allow you to send money to and from Europe, for example, but there are none which are focused on Saudi Arabia, despite the importance of the market for these populations. And again, just to illustrate it at a very high level, you can see the almost exponentially increasing numbers of pilgrims, with the exception of the COVID years every year. And again, as part of Vision 2030, the Saudi government wants to hugely increase the number of Muslims visiting the kingdom every year. And so just to illustrate the problem that we're dealing with, when you have pilgrims who are going to the kingdom, and I might add as well that it's the obligation of every Muslim, if he's able, at least once in his life, to perform Hajj, which is the visit to the holy mosques, specifically Mecca and the Kaaba. So it's a great obligation. So when they come to do it, let's say, for example, they're in Nigeria, they're in Pakistan, they're in Bangladesh, they need local currency, they need riyals, they need foreign currency to be able to pay for everything, whether it's hotels, visas, day-to-day expenditure. But the problem is because of the currency issues in these countries, there is no FX. So as a result, it's not possible to actually move out of rupee or naira. And so they're left typically with three options. Either they bring a large amount of physical currency, their local currency, into Saudi. Now, Saudi is ultimately now a cashless society, so that causes issues at the border, as you might expect, big canvas bags filled with money. Or sometimes they are able to buy Saudi Riyals in their home country, but this will be 2 or 3 times the market rate. So the cost of everything is 2 or 3 times higher. Or they use informal money transfer networks. Hawala is what it's called. And this can work, but it's hugely risky. The money's not guaranteed, and if it goes, it goes. So given the volumes we're talking about, it's incredible risk.
Interesting. Wait, so you said that you said people come in and then it's like a cashless society, right? So does it mean that probably accept Visa and MasterCard? Can people come in and use credit card or debit card from the other countries?
Exactly. So when I, for example, travel to Saudi, being from the UK, I can use all of my British cards. I can use Apple Pay. I can withdraw cash from ATMs, all using my cards. And actually, I'd say cash from ATMs, there's no need to. In Saudi, there's no reason to touch cash at all. But the problem is, if you come from a country, as the majority of visitors to the kingdom do, where you can't get foreign currency cards, you can't access NFC-enabled, Apple Pay and similar, and you're left simply with cash, it's an issue for you. insofar as it's difficult to interact, I guess, in Saudi, but also to get over the border affordably and safely is very, very difficult.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So what we've built, therefore, is something which synthesizes the state of local regulations with respect to handling cash on the one hand, and the I guess the drive towards digitization and cashlessness on the other. So we've built out a front end. It's an app currently available on Android, just because that is the most popular platform amongst our customers, but will soon be available on iOS. And it's a very rudimentary digital wallet service. But what Pilgrims are able to do is, starting with Nigeria, they can pay in either with their local payment methods, so it might be bank transfer, it might be card, or they can bring cash to our offices in Nigeria and deposit it with us. They're given a QR code as part of the app, which our agent will scan in the case of cash, or if they're making a bank transfer, it's automatically processed. And as soon as we receive their funds in local currency, they receive Riyals into their virtual wallet. And we set the rate, which is visible and typically better than what they would get on the street every day. On the back end, we work in stablecoins insofar as we're able to move local currency, take Naira, for example, very easily into USDT. And then we will exchange that USDT into Saudi Riyals. So then when the pilgrim has topped up his account, he has, let's say, 3,000 Saudi Riyals in his UmrahCash wallet. He is then able to travel to the kingdom, and upon arrival will meet one of our agents in Jeddah, Mecca, or Medina, and the agent will scan his QR code, verify his balance, and pay out the cash to him, at which point the customer's wallet is debited and the transaction flow is complete. And so this really, I think, relates to what I said earlier, whereby, in my opinion, the most compelling use cases of blockchain and Web3 are those where the user doesn't know they're using it at all. So actually, I know sort of the podcast is very much Web3 and to a certain extent DeFi oriented, but actually this is very much a back-end use case. So really the only Web3 element is our use of stablecoins. But the reason that's important is because it allows us to overcome this issue, whether it comes to liquidity, international transfers, and local regulation, by using this emerging technology. But the great thing about it is that the average user doesn't know, nor do they need to know. And part of the reason for that is because the average pilgrim, particularly from, say, Nigeria and Pakistan, those are sort of our two focus markets for the moment. The average pilgrim is very conservative. They've got a limited tech appetite and a limited interest when it comes to exploring new opportunities. And so what we do is we package this in a way which is familiar and comfortable to them. The app is built akin to a traditional Nigerian banking app. And for all intents and purposes, they're moving in and out of Riyals. But obviously on the back end, we can keep our treasury in stablecoins and as a result be able to give them deep liquidity and very good pricing, such that when they arrive at Saudi and they cash out with our agents, it's totally unified fiat-to-fiat flow.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So you basically take your local currency in the home country, whether it's like Naira or maybe some other country in Africa, and then you convert it into, I think you said like USDT, right?
Yeah.
On the blockchain, and then you would off-ramp it to get to Saudi Riyal. Is that right?
Yeah, correct, exactly. And typically when we off-ramp, I mean, it's very easy to do so, and it just gives us the ability to have a good amount of local currency that we can give directly to pilgrims. And just a quick note as well on traction. We've already processed over $1.5 million. We've got 25 agents who are receiving pilgrims across 4 different countries. And we're still in the process of, I guess, rolling this product out, because the nature of pilgrimages, it's a very sensitive industry. So we don't want to go, full speed immediately. So we've got 150 pilot users who are representing companies as well, travel agents and similar, who represent the bulk of our early user pool, and we've been transacting through them. So I think the concept is proven. The pain point is acutely there, and now it's really just a question of scaling sustainably. Again, balancing the use of Web3 and stablecoins on the one hand with the otherwise conservative fiat-focused customer base on the other.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So these agents here, are they? So did you probably established relationship with them, right? Probably to work together,
so,
like a partner. Yeah.
Exactly, because the thing is, this business has been it's as old as time. As long as again, people have moved from country to country, there's always been foreign exchange. We're not a foreign exchange platform in the conventional sense, but people need to access money somehow. And so our logic and our thinking, and again, it comes to Web3, it comes to the business model, is that we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel, nor should we be forcing people to adapt to new solutions. It's much better to, as the saying goes, sort of rule by submission, insofar as bend with the wind. And so what we've done is we've recruited a number of agents who work in this sector, work in this field. They're trusted by travel agents. They're trusted by local people in, for example, Nigeria. And we supply them with, say, liquidity, with good prices, and with a great incentive structure. So what they do is effectively sell our product on the back end, but using their networks and the trusts that they have amongst pilgrims and visitors on the front end. And so really our work is then just one of implementation rather than marketing and sales, as it might be if we were trying to, say, steal customers from existing agents.
Yeah, I see. Makes sense, yeah. So leveraging existing network of these agents, right? Yeah.
Well, that's it, because what's particularly interesting is when it comes to pilgrimage, it's actually an extremely complex exercise, insofar as it's very much split by nationality, by, say, groups within countries, by language. When you look at Hajj, for example, which is a set period of pilgrimage every year, you will see that, for example, the West African pilgrims will stay in a certain part of Mecca. Indonesians will stay in another. And then the habits, of course, of these pilgrims are very different. Nigerians typically like to travel in pairs, ones and twos. Indonesians like to go as a big group. And so really the success of a platform like this is one that, the way success comes about is by working with those existing models. You don't try and, as I said, you don't try and put a square peg into a round hole and vice versa. You just have to wrap this new technology into a way which is comfortable and fits with existing practices.
Cool. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. So help me understand a bit more about the pilgrimage. I'm certainly not an expert in this area. How often do people do this? I think you wrote earlier, like 7 million annual visitor, right? Do they visit once a year, twice a year? Like how many times do they come a year?
So there are two types of pilgrimage. You have, I suppose, minor and major, and that's split into Umrah and Hajj. Now, Umrah can be performed anytime. That is to say, whenever, as a Muslim, you're able to travel to to Mecca or Medina, you Umrah. So that's year round, but it has less religious significance and it holds less weight spiritually than Hajj. Hajj is a period every year, approximately a month, where that is the month to perform the majority of the obligations that make up Islamic pilgrimage. And it's that Hajj that Muslims should, if they're able to, complete once in their lifetime. So that 7 million is spread between Hajj season, which is actually heavily regulated by the Saudi government with respect to visa issuance and logistics, because what's fascinating about Hajj in particular is that it's one of the greatest movements of people globally, worldwide, such that the methods that the government use in order to maintain order amongst crowds, in order to ensure that everyone is able to get access at certain times to different parts of the mosque, to Mecca, Medina, they're extremely impressive. So it's an exercise in and of itself, but that's the main period of pilgrimage. But aside from that, it is just a constant, drip flow of visitors to Mecca and Medina year round, as and when they're able. So it's a combination of the two in that respect. It's the year-round pilgrimage and then Hajj season, which is and the good thing with Hajj as well is, particularly from a business perspective, it's very much dictated by the visas that are issued by the government. So there will be a certain number of visas allocated to each country by the Saudi government, and every year they will sell out. So it's very easy to predict or to know exactly how many people will be coming from each region, etc., etc.
Interesting. So people have to book in advance or something when people buy like a permit to go for.
Yeah, exactly right. So again, this is where things get very interesting insofar as the Hajj this year will be in June, and the visas will be issued in February, and effectively the
you
process
mean for next year, right? 2025.
Next year, 2025. Yeah, exactly. And so now, really, it's all about submitting the visa applications. And the visa applications are managed by Hajj boards or commissions in each country, which then devolve the responsibilities for these visa applications to states or areas or regions. Again, it's just a huge exercise, effectively, insofar as there's a lot of logistics and thought and planning that goes into it. But again, this, I think, illustrates what I was describing earlier with respect to how Web3 and blockchain should be used, which is if you look at how, on one hand, almost bureaucratic, but on the other hand, how conservative, say, the Hajj planning is, it would be nigh on impossible to try and integrate fintech directly or integrate emerging technologies head on. So really where the skill comes in is synthesizing the opportunities afforded by, let's say, Web3 on the one hand, with the realities of how this exercise works on the other. And I think only by doing that, which is what we're trying to do at least, is it possible to actually have any success from this angle in this business.
I see. Cool. Yeah. So it sounds like a lot of planning for that. But I think that's also good, right? Because I guess once the government release the data, then you also kind of have a good idea how many people will be coming, right?
Exactly right. And so actually, and this is something the Saudis have always done incredibly well, is the ability to plan and regiment and effectively delineate very effectively between periods of pilgrimage, different countries, groups, etc. So it's extremely well planned, but it's just a question of, I think, being adequately prepared.
Cool. Oh, sounds good. So when you transfer the money, and then when they transfer the money on the local bank account to the agent, right, and then on the blockchain, on which blockchain does this live on? For the money, USDT? Yeah.
Well, the great thing about the actual business model, and this is one of the reasons we're able to operate, is that there's no transfer of funds happening, insofar as it's simply two liquidity pools, which is sort of governed by USDT on the back end. Because if we were literally taking Naira and then in Nigeria, for example, and then trying to transfer it to Saudi, that would be an interbank international transfer. And in doing so, we would effectively become a remittance company or a cross-border payments company. But on the front end, the way it works is we take the Naira and we keep it really in Naira, or we buy USDT with it, and then we sell that USDT. There's no actual transfer of funds. It's simply disparate liquidity pools. But when it comes to moving in and out of stablecoins, and I think this is the case in almost all emerging markets and maybe even developed ones also, it is almost always Tron. Simply because, and this relates to what I was saying earlier about utility and practicality, Tron is by far the quickest and the cheapest with respect to high volume transactions. I mean, if we were trying to buy and sell USDT on ETH, the ERC, the prices would have changed about 5 times between the actual initiation of the transfer and the last block being confirmed. And it's quite interesting as well on that note, because I speak to a lot of new stablecoin projects or sort of ecosystem funds associated with certain stablecoins. Circle might be one of them. And they always, whenever we're speaking, they always ask me, how can we increase volumes or increase usages in Africa or emerging markets at large? And really what it comes down to is doing exactly what Tron has done, which is provide that basic use case, which is applicable and fitting with the local market, which is I want to be able to transact quickly, cheaply, and it doesn't matter if I'm sending 1 USDT or 100,000 at the same price, effectively. And that's what Tron has been able to do. But then it also becomes, I think, to a certain extent, a bit of a chicken and an egg question, because you could have the best stablecoin infrastructure in the world, the cheapest and the fastest, but if no one else is using it, then it effectively becomes worthless. As in, why would I want to be sitting on, say, $1 million worth of your stablecoin if no one will buy it off me? There's no liquidity in the market. And so it's an interesting question. On the one hand, the actual, I guess, underlying tech and the practicality. On the other hand, how you actually get it into circulation. Because as far as I'm aware, Tron hasn't done any grassroots ecosystem building. It's just that it's been picked up and it's kind of spiraled or snowballed from there. So just a side point, but I think an interesting one to consider.
Interesting. Okay, so basically, it never moved from the blockchain. Right? It's just I guess the money never, like you said, like cross internationally, which would make your company become a different type of company, right? Yeah,
exactly. And actually, I mean, the way I look at it and the way I not sell it, but one of the advantages is that it actually prevents capital flight insofar as there is no money physically leaving the country. Because one of the great concerns actually in a number of markets globally is hard cash leaving the country, which is, of course, is what currently happens when pilgrims take these big bags filled with notes to Saudi Arabia. But by allowing us to move in and out of USDT, we keep the Naira or the Riyal onshore. Everything is accounted for, and there's not this capital flight as mentioned. Capital controls restrictions are not breached.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I know there's some maybe developing country, I guess mainly, but maybe some developed country. I'm not sure, but they do have like this kind of there's a maximum amount of money you can bring out in and out of the country, right?
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, which is very strictly enforced. And that's, again, one of the reasons why a lot of pilgrims at the moment get into a lot of trouble, because they're either taking out too much or they're bringing in too much. And it's not out of any malicious intent. It's not a smuggling issue. It's just the fact that the only way for them to pay for a 1 month pilgrimage is by taking large amounts of physical cash. And so really that's what we're addressing, which is how can we enable this access to currency? Because if it wasn't for physical cash going across borders, most of these guys would have no way of feeding themselves. But at the same time, how do we make sure that it's compliant? Because as identified, there are issues associated with these big.
I see, makes sense. So then, in the consumer application you have created, would you consider like a custodial wallet then for the user, in a way?
So it's something we've looked at, actually, because there is, I think, in the long term, the opportunity of offering, say, for example, stablecoins directly. I guess making it more of a stablecoin native platform. But the problem is, again, it's about consumer habits. At the moment, the majority of customers we work with are not ready to use crypto. They don't necessarily have a use case for crypto, and actually, by sheer association, are very suspicious of crypto. So what we prefer to do is keep it on the back end, leverage it for its benefits, and provide a comfortable operating environment for the average customer, whether he's used a smartphone before or not. So it's being considered. It's in the works, but just given the nature of the customer base we're dealing with, it's not sort of on the radar for the moment. Because again, I think that's another way of looking at UmrahCash. It's a synthesization of Web3 and DeFi principles on the one hand, with a market which is actually quite the polar opposite as it currently stands.
Cool, interesting then. But then I guess for customer who are new to your service, and how do you actually convince them to use the service? Because I guess some people is there some sort of, I guess what I'm asking, like, is there some sort of guarantee that once they give you the money, like usually people might be like, what I mean, like they have some sort of question. Exactly. How do you overcome that for like first time customer?
Yeah, it's a great question. Actually, trust is the biggest barrier in this industry, but also it's the biggest opportunity. So as mentioned before, in the same way that we work with existing agent networks to pay out money in Saudi Arabia, we also work with existing agent networks to receive money. So travel agents, for example, are the most common way by which pilgrims buy their packages or tickets. And travel agents typically have the trust of their pilgrims, insofar as one family will always go to one travel agent, and that's the way it will work every year. So if we're able to onboard those travel agents are then able to effectively sell our service. So we can effectively white label it. We can give them the infrastructure. And really at that point, all we do is provide the liquidity, which is what USDT enables us to do. We provide the liquidity and then also the disbursement networks in Saudi Arabia. The actual question of selling the product or otherwise using it in a way which is comfortable for the average pilgrim is then up to the travel agent. Naturally, they profit off it as well, because we cut them into the infrastructure. But again, for us, it just then becomes a stable coin on an off-ramp play, but with few of the difficulties associated with marketing.
Cool. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Leveraging existing networks of these travel agents. Usually travel agents are like long-term established, right? So they usually have the trust already. Yeah. Because I think otherwise, if people come to your company for the first time, right? Like how can they gain the trust? So I know that usually for example, with a Western Union or Wise or any of those money transfer company, right? People trust to use it because first of all, I think they're compliant with the law, and second is that their brand has been doing for years, right? Sometimes for decades.
I think with a lot of legacy companies that effectively offer the same service, it's not even about compliance. It's just the recognition, insofar as I've seen that brand a lot. I know people who use that brand, and therefore I will also use that brand or use that company. It's a consumer mindset thing, I think, to a certain extent. So, it's about how you develop that trust. Because I think whether you're in the US, the UK, in West Africa, or Southeast Asia, consumers are not particularly different in terms of what they look for, what makes them comfortable, how they approach, say, new ideas. But naturally, there is that aspect of localization at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. Makes sense. Cool. So then I'm curious about with the people behind your company. How many people right now working in your company?
So we currently have 11 full-time employees. And they're split basically between the different markets that we work in, at the moment being Nigeria and also Saudi Arabia. So aside from the tech team, who were very talented and really have keep the platform running day to day, we also have a lot of operational team members, the ones who are responsible for grassroots implementation, marketing, onboarding. Because really, at the moment, due to the input or the implementation of cash at both ends of the spectrum, it is quite a resource-intensive business when it comes to the actual customer journey. So a lot of our team at the moment is dedicated to that. But the way we operate and the way we work is, on the one hand, remote, but also again reliant on that local presence. So it's a fine balancing act, I would say, between the two.
Interesting. And I think you said probably Nigeria will be one of your big market at first, right? Because you already have like familiarity, and then you said some of your team members also there, right? Yeah, cool.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it's a blessing and a curse insofar as it's a market that I'm very familiar with and comfortable operating in. But at the same time, it is the hardest, I think, for a product like this, just because I think compared to a lot of other markets in Nigeria, trust is very low and digitization is somewhat limited. By which I mean, if, for example, we rolled out this product in, let's say, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, there's a huge number of digital payment solutions, whether it's UPI in India or mobile wallets in Indonesia, that we could plug into extremely easily. And with that comes great KYC vetting and sort of local payment channels that are fully compliant in Saudi as well. Nigeria is a very different story insofar as it's far more localized and there's just an absence of information in many cases. So you really are starting from zero. But the way I look at it is that if we're able to, capture the Nigerian market, then everything from there is extremely easy.
Interesting. So I guess Nigeria, one of the tougher market, right?
It's one of the tougher markets, but at the same time, and again, bringing it back to sort of Web3, it's one of the most liquid stablecoin markets in the world. When Binance was shut down, there was a notable, Binance was shut down in Nigeria, should I say, there was a notable impact on its daily trading volume. Nigeria is the easiest market to move in and out of USDT, I think, probably in the world, simply because there are so many people active in the market and such deep liquidity as a result. So where there is a cloud, there is also a silver lining. It's a double-edged sword, as they say.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. So then, with 11 people spreading around 2 countries, working remote, what are some of the challenges facing your team?
I think it's, despite the kind of remote in-person divide, there is, I think, a great sense of cohesion insofar as the vision or the product we're building is actually quite a simple one. Again, it's just simplifying access to money and to currency for pilgrimage. So no matter where you're based, ultimately the aim is very, very clear. So on that basis, it's easier maybe than expected to keep morale high and to keep the team working and focused. The challenge, of course, is the fact that they're spread across different geographies, from different backgrounds, doing different things. So at least at first glance, it's not always obvious, what brings them together. But I think we've been very fortunate in having, great team members who are very motivated, and as mentioned, I think brought together by that common goal, such that even if our catch up can only be once every couple of weeks because of different people's schedules and what they're doing. Whenever we do sit down as a team, it's always extremely productive, and again, I think morale is very high as a result.
Nice. I think that's great to hear. Yeah, I think typically for like fully remote company, I feel like if you have a chance to meet your colleagues, right, understand their working style, sure, it helps absolutely. A lot. Yeah,
it does. It makes everything easier.
For sure. Cool. So then, interesting. Then, can you share with us what are some of the upcoming roadmap then, or what are some of the upcoming plan for your company?
Yeah, so with respect to roadmap, our plan is twofold. On the one hand, it's very much about implementation now. It's taken some time to build up relationships, build up the infrastructure, and actually be ready to offer this service. Because as mentioned, we're treading a fine line between digital solutions and digitization on the one hand, and a market which is quite conservative and in some respects suspicious on the other. But we're now at a stage whereby everything is in place. We have the team, we have the infrastructure, we have the networks. And so we're scaling the business, at least in the markets in which we're operating, which is West Africa and Nigeria specifically. But at the same time, we're looking at expanding because UmrahCash is not just a Nigerian Saudi project. It's an infrastructure layer. It's the ability to easily access local currency with home currency deposits. So as I think the flow from Nigeria is cemented and becomes comfortable, that is to say, from an operational perspective, we're looking very seriously at moving to South Asia and Southeast Asia, specifically Indonesia, Pakistan, and India. So it's growth in two respects, both in terms of the product and the actual operations, but then also the markets that we're addressing.
Cool, interesting. Yeah, I think that would make sense, right? Because I think in the area you want to expand to, a lot of people also join the pilgrimage or the Hajj, right? Yeah, and it's also a huge opportunity.
Yes, exactly. And I think just in addition as well, I mean, one thing we're really betting on, we're really pushing for, in Saudi at least, is increased digitization and the liberalization of fintech regulations. Because as soon as we ourselves are able to eliminate cash, it makes our operations a lot more streamlined. So the ultimate goal for us is actually to eliminate the cash networks and instead move to a system of prepaid Visa cards or debit cards. The idea being that we can off-ramp directly into a float or a bank account. And when pilgrims arrive in Saudi, instead of having to deal and be given cash, they're given a UmrahCash card instead, which they can then transact with, withdraw from ATMs or use in shops. But again, it's just a question of Saudi, the authorities allowing that. Because at the moment, as mentioned, those solutions are restricted only to residents or passport holders.
I see. Interesting. Yeah. So when you said resident, does that include permanent resident only, or does that also include like maybe people who work and live in Saudi, like migrant workers and visa?
Yeah, so it's both.
On visa, yeah.
Exactly. It's both. But the thing is, in order to be able to live and work in Saudi, you need to have what's known as an Iqama,
which
is like a residency permit.
Oh, okay.
Iqama. So IQMA, it's like a residency card. It's a Saudi resident called an Iqama. And the issue, or not the issue, but the difficulty of an Iqama is that it's attached to a specific job contract normally. So what it means is that it's very difficult to actually have one unless you are full-time employed in the kingdom for a certain set of time. It's not like, for example, you don't study and then become eligible for a short-term residency, that sort of thing. It's extremely narrow with respect to issuance. So for most people, most visitors, it's off limits.
I see. So it's quite limited in what you can do. So do people? I guess people they usually get a job in Saudi, but they apply from your home country and then get a visa and come to Saudi. Is that kind of how people usually come?
Yeah, so it very much depends, I think, on the nature of the job and the background of the person. But what often happens is that recruitment will happen in the home country. They will have the Iqama issued, so that's such that when they arrive in Saudi, they get given the Iqama, and then the Iqama is attached to their job contract, which is normally 1 to 3 years. As soon as the job contract ends, the Iqama expires and they leave the country. But whilst they're in the country, their bank accounts, their rent payments, everything is attached to that Iqama. So it's an extremely important document. It's basically your lifeline when it comes to being able to do anything in
I see. Kingdom. Interesting. So how does it work for people who want to run their own business in Saudi Arabia?
So this is one of the great things that Saudi has recently introduced, which is effectively entrepreneurship licenses issued by the Ministry of Investment. Because now for the first time, and we were very fortunate to be a beneficiary of this, foreigners are able to open companies, provided they get a letter of support from a government agency, effectively testifying or confirming they're doing something which is of interest when it comes to technology or entrepreneurship. So given Vision 2030 and the great work of the Saudi government in actually opening up many sectors of the economy to investment and entrepreneurship, it is becoming easier and easier to start your own company. It's not quite at the level of, say, the UAE, where it can be done, for $1,000 in 1 month, but it's certainly getting there. So the opportunities are growing, and it's almost bittersweet insofar as the reason that UmrahCash was born was out of a lot of the difficulties associated with the Saudi market. But actually, week on week, I see things becoming easier. So actually, when you talk about the roadmap, a lot of what we're looking at and focusing on is actually how to synthesize ourselves with the developments and the opportunities that the governments are introducing in the country, and how we can adjust our business model as a result.
Cool. So basically, once they have this entrepreneurial license, it's like a medium-term visa, would you say? And then they can do whatever they want, or only limited area?
Well, no, an entrepreneurship license just gives you the right to actually open the company as a foreigner, and from that point, you can then you can receive an Iqama as a result. Okay.
2 more questions here from my side. One is, I'm curious, you're probably very familiar with Islamic finance, but can you share with us how Islamic finance and crypto will evolve in the next few years?
Yeah, certainly. So I think, it's a big point of discussion. And one of the interesting things about Islamic finance is the fact that it is very much, I suppose, evolving area of study. So, given the pronouncements of certain sort of Sharia boards and supervisory committees, there's always scope for development and innovation. Crypto, I know, has been judged by some actually to be one of the most Islamically compliant forms of finance on the basis that there is no interest. And it's actually incredibly clean as far as profiting from interest or otherwise un-Islamic methods of investment are concerned. But at the same time, crypto again is completely open box by nature, such that by default, it's not possible to fully regulate it or control it. So I think to a certain extent it depends again on who is maybe making issuances or judgments on crypto. From what angle of the Islamic finance community or world they derive. But at the same time, I think the signs are definitely there, particularly in the Gulf states, towards a synthesization with traditional methods of finance and sort of crypto as it currently is. But again, I think with any sort of crypto regulation, it's a question of how we synthesize or bring together regulation and government on the one hand with a project which is, I suppose, by essence, anti-regulation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that makes sense. Thank you so much. And final question: where can people follow you? Please feel free to share any public handles or username.
Yeah, of course. You can follow me on Twitter, W_Phelps, but LinkedIn is where I'm most active. So William Phelps. And you can follow UmrahCash there as well for the latest business.
Awesome,
updates.
Sounds good. Once again, thank you so much for joining the show today, William. It's been really fun chatting about your company, UmrahCash, and learning about much more about like how the running a business work in Saudi Arabia, and also learning about Pilgrimage and Hash. Thank you so much again for joining you.
No, thank you so much, Lam. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate the time and looking forward to speaking
Thank
soon.
you. And we're back to my studio. What do you guys think about this episode with William, founder and CEO of UmrahCash? This is the first time I've interviewed an entrepreneur based in Saudi Arabia. I think William and his team is tackling a very niche problem in cross-border finance, and it's interesting how his team is using crypto to solve this. Please leave a comment below to share with us what you think. For the next episode, we'll be talking to Wilbert. He's a business development person at Pendo Finance. Pendo is a DeFi protocol focused on yield trading, allowing users to both fix or leverage their yield. If you're interested in DeFi, then the next episode is definitely for you. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. It means a lot to me. Thank you for watching and see you next time.